Touch me again, and I'll drain all your blood, human." I just smiled and touched her once more. The Celestial Wanderer was not the biggest ship in the galaxy, but it carried something far more valuable than size could ever measure. It carried hope. And it carried humanity's first real chance to join the stars. Commander Marcus Cole stood at the bridge window and watched as Nexus Station grew larger in the void of space, its massive rings spinning slowly like a mechanical flower made of metal and light. And he felt his heart beat faster with every passing second. "Commander, we are receiving docking clearance," Lieutenant Chun announced from her station, her voice steady but her eyes betraying the same excitement that every human on board was feeling. Marcus nodded and straightened his dress uniform, the dark blue fabric decorated with gold trim that represented Earth's unified space command. And he thought about how many years humanity had waited for this moment. How many generations had looked up at the stars and wondered if anyone was out there. The answer had come 50 years ago when the first alien signals reached Earth. But the Galactic Concord had kept humanity at arm's length ever since, treating them like dangerous children who were not ready to play with the adults. And now, finally, they had been invited to the table. "All crew, prepare for diplomatic protocols," Marcus spoke into the ship-wide communication system. "Remember your training, and remember that you represent every human who has ever lived and every human who will ever live after us. No pressure." A few nervous laughs echoed through the bridge, and Marcus smiled because humor was one of humanity's greatest tools, a way to face fear and uncertainty with something other than panic. The docking procedure took 20 minutes, and then the airlock doors opened to reveal a corridor of pure white light that led into the station. And Marcus took his first step onto alien ground with his head held high and his diplomatic team following close behind. Nexus Station was everything the intelligence reports had described, and somehow more. With ceilings that stretched so high they disappeared into artificial clouds, and walkways that floated without any visible support, and species of every shape and color moving through the spaces like fish in an enormous aquarium. Marcus saw creatures with 4 arms and creatures with no arms at all, beings made of what looked like living crystal, and beings that seemed to be nothing but shadow and teeth. And he reminded himself that to them he probably looked just as strange. A guide met them at the entrance, a tall being with blue skin and 3 eyes arranged in a triangle on its face, and it spoke in perfect English thanks to the universal translator embedded in its throat. "Welcome to Nexus Station. Human delegation, the Concord Assembly awaits your presence at the Grand Reception Hall, where representatives from 47 species have gathered to witness this historic moment." Marcus thanked the guide and followed it through corridors that twisted and turned in ways that made his head spin. Past markets selling goods he could not identify and restaurants serving food that smelled like nothing on Earth. And finally they arrived at a set of massive doors carved from some kind of purple stone. The doors swung open and Marcus stepped into a room so large that it could have held a small city, filled with tables and platforms designed for species of every possible body type. And 1,000 alien eyes turned to look at the humans who had finally arrived. "Stay calm and smile," Marcus whispered to his team. "They are just as curious about us as we are about them." The reception began smoothly enough, with Marcus shaking appendages and exchanging greetings with dozens of alien dignitaries, learning their names and their species and their roles in the great machine of galactic politics. And he started to believe that maybe this would all work out. Then he saw her. She stood near the center of the room, surrounded by a bubble of empty space that no other alien dared to enter. And she was the most beautiful and terrifying creature Marcus had ever seen in his entire life. Her skin was pale as moonlight, with subtle patterns that shifted like living frost beneath the surface. Her hair was silver and seemed to move on its own like smoke frozen in time. And her eyes were the color of polished mercury with vertical pupils that tracked everything in the room. She wore a gown of deep crimson that flowed around her like liquid blood, and she held herself with the absolute confidence of someone who had never known fear in her entire existence. "Who is that?" Marcus asked his guide in a low voice. The guide's three eyes widened with something that looked very much like terror, and its voice dropped to barely a whisper. "That is Lady Silthery Vexmora of the Hemovari Empire. They are the oldest and most feared species in the Concord, Commander. And I strongly advise you to keep your distance, because they possess the ability to drain the life force from any living creature through mere skin contact." Marcus watched as other aliens gave her a wide berth, their body language screaming fear and submission. And something about that made a small spark of defiance light up in his chest, because humans had never been very good at being afraid. He started walking toward her before his brain could tell his legs to stop. "Commander, what are you doing?" One of his aides hissed behind him, but Marcus kept walking, drawn by curiosity and something else he could not name. He was about 10 feet away from her when another alien diplomat, a large creature with scales and too many legs, suddenly backed away from a nearby conversation and bumped directly into Marcus, sending him stumbling forward. His hand shot out to catch his balance and landed directly on Lady Silthery's bare forearm. The entire hall went silent, and Marcus could hear his own heartbeat thundering in his ears as 1,000 aliens held their breath. Lady Silthery turned her mercury eyes upon him, and her pale lips pulled back to reveal teeth that were just slightly too sharp to be comforting. And when she spoke, her voice was like ice cracking on a frozen lake. "Touch me again, and I will drain all your blood, human." The threat hung in the air like a death sentence, and Marcus could see other humans on his team going pale with fear. And he knew that every alien in the room expected him to fall to his knees and beg for forgiveness. But Marcus Cole had grown up on Earth, where humans had fought saber-toothed tigers and survived ice ages and climbed out of every disaster that nature had thrown at them. And something deep in his DNA simply refused to submit. So he smiled, a warm and genuine smile that reached all the way to his eyes, and he looked directly into those terrifying silver pools. "My apologies for the accident, my lady," he said in a voice that carried across the silent hall. "But I should warn you that humans do not respond well to threats." And then, with every alien watching in absolute horror, Commander Marcus Cole reached out and placed his hand directly on her bare arm once more. Silthery's eyes flew wide open, and her hand clamped down on his wrist with crushing force. And Marcus could feel something strange happening, a pulling sensation like invisible fingers reaching into his veins. But then it stopped. The Hemovari noble's face shifted from fury to confusion to something that looked almost like fear, and her grip loosened as she stared at their connected hands. Nothing was happening. For the first time in her 300 years of life, Lady Silthery Vexmora tried to drain a creature and failed completely. The whispers started immediately, spreading through the hall like wildfire, and Marcus stood there with his hand still on her arm, smiling that same calm smile while the entire galaxy watched and wondered what kind of creatures these humans truly were. The chaos that erupted in the grand reception hall was unlike anything Nexus Station had seen in over a century, with aliens shouting in dozens of languages and security forces pushing through the crowd, and Lady Silthery standing frozen in place like a statue carved from ice. Marcus felt hands grab his shoulders as station security pulled him away from the Hemovari noble, and he let them take him without resistance because he had already made his point, and there was no reason to make things worse. "You have committed an act of aggression against a member of the Hemovari royal family," a security officer barked at him, its forearms working to restrain Marcus, even though he was not fighting back. "You will be detained until the Concord Council decides your fate." Marcus nodded calmly and allowed himself to be led away, catching one last glimpse of Lady Silthery being surrounded by her own people, their pale faces filled with confusion and fear as they examined her arm like it was a broken machine. The detention cell was actually quite comfortable, with a bed that adjusted to human body shape and a window that showed a pleasant simulation of an earth forest. And Marcus sat down and waited because that was all he could do. 3 hours passed before anyone came to see him, and when the door finally opened, it was not a security officer but a small alien with 6 eyes and tentacles instead of arms, carrying a medical kit. "I am Dr. Velix of the Galactic Science Division," the creature announced. "I have been sent to examine you and determine how you survived contact with a HFY. This is quite unprecedented, and the Council is very interested in answers." Marcus rolled up his sleeve and let the doctor take samples of his blood and scan his body with devices that hummed and beeped in ways he did not understand. And he answered every question honestly because he had nothing to hide. "Fascinating," Dr. Velix muttered as data scrolled across its scanning device. "Your blood contains extremely high levels of iron bound in a protein called hemoglobin. And your immune system is remarkably aggressive. Tell me, human, what is the medical history of your species?" Marcus laughed and shook his head because that was a very big question. "Where do I even start? We have survived diseases that killed millions. Parasites that lived inside our bodies, predators that hunted us for food, and poisons in almost every plant and animal on our planet. Earth is not a gentle place, Doctor." The scientist's 6 eyes blinked in sequence as it processed this information, and Marcus could see something like understanding beginning to form. "I believe I have a theory," Dr. Velix said slowly. "The HFY drain life force by establishing a biological connection through skin contact, essentially creating a one-way flow of energy from victim to HFY. But your blood chemistry appears to create a feedback loop that blocks this connection." Marcus raised an eyebrow with interest. "So what does that mean in simple terms?" "It means, Commander, that your species may be naturally immune to HFY draining. The iron in your blood and your aggressive immune response essentially treat the draining attempt as an attack and shut it down before it can begin." This was incredible news, and Marcus felt a small smile forming on his face because this explained why Silthery had looked so shocked. "Can you tell the Council this?" Marcus asked. "I did not attack her. I was bumped by another alien and touched her by accident the first time." "And the second time?" Marcus shrugged with a grin that made the doctor's tentacles twitch nervously. "The second time, I was proving a point. Humans do not like being threatened, Doctor, and we certainly do not bow down to fear." Dr. Velix left with its samples and data, and Marcus was alone again for another 2 hours before the door opened once more. This time, the visitor made his heart skip a beat because Lady Silthery Vexmora herself glided into the cell, her crimson gown trailing behind her like a river of blood, and her silver eyes fixed on him with an intensity that could melt steel. The guards tried to follow her, but she dismissed them with a wave of her hand, and then the door closed and they were alone together. "You should not be here," Marcus said, rising to his feet. "I imagine your people are not happy that a human touched their noble twice and lived to tell about it." Silvery studied him like a scientist examining a new specimen, circling him slowly with her hands clasped behind her back. "My people are terrified," she admitted in that cold voice of hers. "For 300 years I have been able to drain any creature I touch. It is not just a weapon. Human, it is part of who the HFY are, and you have just proven that we are not as powerful as we believed." Marcus watched her circle him and noticed something in her eyes that she was trying very hard to hide vulnerability. "Is that why you came here? To figure out how I did it?" Silvery stopped in front of him and crossed her arms, her silver hair shifting like smoke around her shoulders. "I came here because I want to understand you. Every species in this galaxy fears the HFY, but you looked at me and you smiled, and then you touched me again even after I threatened to kill you." She leaned closer, her face just inches from his, and Marcus could see the pattern shifting beneath her pale skin like frost forming on a window. "What kind of creatures are you humans that you do not fear death?" Marcus held her gaze without flinching, and he thought about how to explain humanity to someone who had never walked on Earth. "We fear death plenty," he said honestly, "but we have learned that fear is a terrible master on Earth. Everything tried to kill us, from the smallest bacteria to the largest predators, from the weather itself to other humans, and if we had let fear control us, we would have gone extinct 1,000,000 years ago." He took a small step forward, not backing down even when she was close enough to touch. "We evolved to face our fears and fight anyway. It is written into our DNA. Lady Silthery, and no threat in the universe will change that." Something shifted in her mercury eyes, something that might have been respect or curiosity or both. "The doctor says your blood makes you immune to my abilities," she said quietly. "Do you know what that means? That I can shake your hand without dying?" A ghost of a smile flickered across her pale lips before vanishing. "It means you are the first being I have met in 3 centuries who does not have to fear me. Do you have any idea how lonely that is, human?" Before Marcus could respond, an explosion rocked the station, and alarms began screaming through the corridors. Silthery spun toward the door, and Marcus was right behind her, his diplomatic training instantly replaced by military instincts. The door burst open, and a security officer rushed in, its face twisted with panic. "Lady Silthery, Commander Cole, there has been an assassination attempt. Someone just tried to kill the entire human delegation with a bomb planted in their quarters." Marcus felt his blood run cold because his entire team was in those quarters. "How many survived?" he demanded. "All of them. The bomb was discovered before detonation, but the investigation has revealed that this was not a random attack." The officer's eyes darted nervously between the two of them. "Evidence has been found linking the bomb to Hemavari operatives. Someone is trying to start a war between your species." Silthery's eyes blazed with fury, and frost began forming on the walls around her. "That is impossible. My people would never risk war with the Concord." Marcus looked at her and saw the truth in her anger, and he made a decision that would change everything. "I believe you," he said simply. "Which means someone else planted that evidence to frame your people. Someone who does not want humanity to join the Concord." Their eyes met, and in that moment 2 former enemies became something else. Entirely allies bound by a mystery that threatened both their species. "Then we need to find out who," Silthery said coldly. "And we need to find out why." Marcus nodded and extended his hand to her, an offer of partnership that would have been unthinkable just hours ago. "Together?" Silthery looked at his hand for a long moment, and then slowly, carefully, she placed her pale fingers in his palm. "Together, human, and this time I am touching you by choice." The corridors of Nexus Station felt different now as Marcus walked beside Lady Silthery, the usual crowds parting before them like water before 2 ships. And he noticed that the aliens were not just afraid of the Hemavari. Noble, they were now looking at him with something like fear as well. "Word has spread about what you did," Silthery observed, her silver eyes scanning the crowds with practiced ease. "The human who cannot be drained. You have become something of a legend in just a few hours." Marcus shrugged and kept his expression neutral, because he had more important things to worry about than his sudden fame. "Let them talk right now. I care more about finding out who tried to kill my people and why they wanted to blame your species for it." Silthery led him through a series of restricted corridors, using her noble status to bypass security checkpoints that would have stopped anyone else, until they arrived at a private docking bay where a ship of pure elegance waited. The vessel was long and sleek, colored in deep reds and blacks that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, and Marcus recognized it from intelligence briefings as a Hemavari royal transport. "This is the Crimson Throne," Silthery announced. My personal vessel and the safest place on this station. My intelligence operatives are already gathering information, and we will coordinate our investigation from here. Marcus followed her up the boarding ramp and into a ship that was unlike anything humans had ever built, with organic curves and surfaces that seemed almost alive, and lighting that pulsed gently like a slow heartbeat. A crew of HFY stood at attention as their lady passed, their pale faces carefully blank, but their eyes following Marcus with undisguised curiosity. They have never seen a human before, Sylphie explained, and certainly not one walking freely aboard a HFY vessel. Try not to touch any of them unless you want to cause another incident. Marcus raised his hands in surrender and smiled. I will keep my hands to myself, I promise. The command center of the ship was a circular room with holographic displays floating in the air, showing data feeds from across the station, and Sylphie took her place on an elevated platform while Marcus stood beside her. Show me what we know, she commanded, and her operatives began presenting their findings. The fake evidence linking the bomb to HFY operatives was sophisticated but not perfect, with tiny flaws that only someone familiar with HFY technology would recognize. This was created by someone who studied us but does not truly know us, one operative reported. The signature codes are copies of patterns we stopped using decades ago. Marcus frowned and crossed his arms. So we are looking for a species with access to old HFY intelligence that narrows it down, but not by much. Sylphie's eyes narrowed as she studied the data. There is more run a trace on the explosive compounds used in the bomb. The operative's fingers danced across controls, and new data appeared on the display. The explosives are military grade, manufactured exclusively by the Korvax Dominion. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine because even humans had heard of the Korvax, a militaristic species known for their aggression and their belief that strength was the only thing that mattered in the galaxy. Why would the Korvax want to start a war between humans and HFY? He asked. Sylphie stepped down from her platform and walked to a different display, pulling up historical records that stretched back centuries. Because they have been manipulating the Concord from the shadows for a very long time. Look at this. The display showed a timeline of species that had tried to join the Concord over the past 200 years, and Marcus felt his stomach drop as he saw a disturbing pattern. 17 species applied for membership in the past 2 centuries, Sylphie explained, and all 17 were either rejected or destroyed by convenient accidents before they could be accepted. The Korvax were involved in every single case. Marcus studied the data, and his military mind began connecting dots. They are keeping certain species out on purpose, but why? What makes these species special? Sylphie turned to face him, and her expression was grave. Every one of these species shared certain traits: high aggression, strong survival instincts, rapid technological advancement, and most importantly, resistance to being controlled through fear. She gestured at Marcus with one pale hand. Sound familiar, human? The implications hit Marcus like a physical blow. They've been keeping humanity quarantined on purpose. We are not being excluded because we are not ready. We are being excluded because they are afraid of us. Sylphie nodded slowly. The Korvax rule through intimidation and military superiority. But your species does not respond to intimidation the way others do. A human looked at me. Was told they would die if they touched me again, and touched me anyway. She almost smiled. That kind of defiance terrifies them more than any weapon. Marcus began pacing as his mind raced through possibilities. So they tried to kill us and blame your people because a war between humans and HFY would solve 2 problems at once. It would eliminate humanity and weaken the HFY Empire. The HFY are the only species in the Concord strong enough to challenge Korvax dominance. Sylphie confirmed. We have been rivals for centuries, but they have never dared to attack us directly. Until now, Marcus finished grimly. The door to the command center opened, and one of Silthery's operatives rushed in, her pale face even whiter than usual. "My lady, we have intercepted a communication from the Korvax delegation. They are preparing to present evidence to the council claiming that the human commander attacked you deliberately as part of a coordinated assassination attempt." Marcus let out a harsh laugh that held no humor. "They are going to twist what happened at the reception into an act of war. I touched you, so obviously I must have been trying to kill you." Silthery's eyes flashed with cold fury. "They are moving faster than I anticipated. We need more evidence to counter their claims, but gathering it will take time we do not have." Marcus thought about his team, still trapped in damaged quarters somewhere on the station. Thought about Earth waiting for news back home. Thought about all the humans who were counting on him to succeed. "Then, we do not play defense," he decided. "We go on the attack not with weapons, but with truth." Silthery tilted her head with curiosity. "What do you propose?" "You said the Korvax have been manipulating the Concord for centuries, keeping species like mine out. That means there must be records, communications, evidence of their interference scattered across galactic databases." Marcus stepped closer to her, his voice intense. "I am willing to bet that your intelligence network can find that evidence if they know where to look." Silthery considered this for a moment, then nodded. "It will be dangerous. The Korvax monitor all communications and will know we are investigating them." "Good," Marcus said with a predatory smile. "Let them know. Let them realize that humanity is not going to quietly disappear like all the others." Silthery studied him with those mercury eyes, and something in her expression shifted to what might have been admiration. "You truly do not know how to back down, do you?" "It is a human thing," Marcus replied. "We call it stubbornness, some call it stupidity, but it has kept us alive for 1,000,000 years." Silthery turned to her operatives and began issuing orders in a language Marcus did not understand. And within minutes, the entire Hemavari intelligence network was mobilizing. "We will find the truth," she said, turning back to Marcus. "But you need to understand something about my people. We have our own secrets, things I have never shared with outsiders." She hesitated, and Marcus saw vulnerability in her eyes again. "The Hemavari are dying. Our reliance on draining other species has made us evolutionarily weak, and our population declines every generation." Marcus blinked in surprise. "I had no idea you hide it well." "We hide it because showing weakness in this galaxy means death," Silthery said bitterly. "But your immunity to our abilities, the unique properties of human biology, it may hold the key to saving my people." She reached out and touched his arm, deliberately this time. "That is why I'm willing to risk everything to help you, Marcus Cole, not just because the Korvax are our enemies, but because humanity might be the Hemavari's only hope." Marcus looked at her hand on his arm and felt the weight of 2 species resting on his shoulders. "Then let us make sure neither of us falls," he said firmly. "Humanity and Hemavari, together against whatever the galaxy throws at us." An alarm suddenly blared through the ship, and an operative shouted in panic. "My lady, the Korvax have made their move. They are demanding the immediate execution of the human delegation." The Concord Assembly Hall was filled to capacity with representatives from every species in the Alliance, their voices creating a roar of noise that echoed off the ancient walls. And at the center of it all stood Marcus Cole and his 50 crew members surrounded by armed guards. The Korvax delegation occupied a raised platform on one side of the chamber, their scaled bodies gleaming under the lights, their leader speaking in a booming voice that silenced all others. "The evidence is undeniable," Ambassador Vexnar declared, his yellow eyes sweeping across the assembly. The human commander deliberately attacked Lady Silthery Vexmora in an unprovoked act of aggression, and bombs were found in their quarters designed to assassinate key members of this council. Shouts of anger erupted from various delegations, and Marcus saw fear and hatred on alien faces that had greeted him warmly just yesterday. "We demand justice," Vexinar continued, his voice dripping with false righteousness. "The human delegation must be executed, and their species must be permanently barred from Concord space. They are too dangerous to be allowed amongst civilized peoples." Marcus stepped forward, despite the guards' attempts to hold him back, his voice cutting through the chaos. "I request the right to speak in my own defense." The council chairman, an ancient being with a crystalline body that chimed when it moved, raised a hand for silence. "The accused has the right to address the assembly, speak human, but know that your words carry great weight." Marcus looked around the vast chamber at hundreds of species who had never seen a human before yesterday. Species who had been taught to fear his kind through centuries of Korvax manipulation. And he knew that everything depended on what he said next. "Members of the Galactic Concord, I will not waste your time denying what happened at the reception. I did touch Lady Silthery twice, once by accident and once by choice." Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd, and Ambassador Vexinar smiled with satisfaction. "But I did not do it to attack her," Marcus continued, his voice growing stronger. "I did it because when she threatened to kill me, something inside me refused to submit." He turned slowly, making eye contact with as many delegates as he could. "On my homeworld, we have a saying, those who kneel to bullies will spend their whole lives on their knees." "This is ridiculous," Vexinar interrupted. "He admits his aggression and expects us to excuse it with primitive philosophy." "Let me tell you about primitive philosophy," Marcus shot back. "Let me tell you about Earth." He walked toward the center of the chamber, guards following nervously. "My species evolved on a planet that tried to kill us every single day. We were not the strongest or the fastest or the deadliest creatures on Earth, but we survived because we refused to give up." His voice echoed through the suddenly silent hall. "Diseases wiped out half our population, but we learned medicine and fought back. Ice ages froze our world, but we discovered fire and survived. Predators hunted us, but we made weapons and became the hunters." He pointed directly at Ambassador Vexinar. "And when tyrants tried to enslave us, we fought them too. Sometimes we lost and sometimes we died, but we always got back up." Marcus turned to face the council chairman. "You have spent centuries keeping humanity isolated because species like the Korvax told you we were too dangerous, too aggressive, too unpredictable. But has anyone ever asked what we would do if given a chance to prove ourselves?" The chairman's crystalline form flickered with interest. "What would you do, human?" Marcus took a deep breath. "We would stand beside you, not because we were told to, not because we were afraid not to, but because protecting others is what humans do." He turned back to the assembly. "Yes, we are aggressive in defending those who cannot defend themselves. Yes, we are dangerous to anyone who threatens the innocent. Yes, we are unpredictable because when everyone expects us to run, we charge forward instead." Ambassador Vexinar slammed his clawed hand on his platform. "Pretty words from a species of violent primitives. The evidence proves. Your evidence is fabricated." Every head in the chamber turned as Lady Silthery Vexmora entered through the main doors, her crimson gown flowing behind her like a tide of blood. And in her hands she carried a data crystal that glowed with inner light. "Lady Silthery," the chairman intoned, "you were the victim of this alleged attack. What evidence do you bring?" Silthery walked to the center of the chamber and stood beside Marcus, close enough that their shoulders almost touched, and the assembly buzzed with shock at seeing a Hemovari noble standing with a human. "I bring the truth," she declared. "For the past several hours, my intelligence network has been investigating the bombing, and the evidence that was supposedly found, all of it traces back to Korvax sources." She activated the data crystal and holographic images filled the air above the assembly. These are communications between Korvax operatives discussing the plan to eliminate the human delegation and frame my people for the crime. They wanted to start a war that would weaken both HFY and humanity. Ambassador Vexenar's scales seemed to pale. This is falsified HFY tricks designed to is more. Silthery cut him off coldly. Records showing that the Korvax have sabotaged 17 species over the past 2 centuries, preventing them from joining the Concord because they were considered threats to Korvax dominance. The holographic display showed faces and names and dates, a damning history of manipulation and murder. The Korvax have not been protecting the Concord, they have been controlling it. Chaos erupted in the chamber as delegates shouted accusations and demands, and Marcus saw fear on Korvax faces for the first time. Then everything changed. The station shook with a massive impact, and alarms began screaming through every corridor. "We are under attack," someone yelled. "Korvax warships are decloaking around the station." Ambassador Vexenar's expression shifted from fear to cold determination. "If we cannot control this alliance, we will destroy it. All forces, open fire." Through the transparent walls of the assembly hall, Marcus could see massive Korvax warships appearing from nowhere, their weapons already firing at the station's defensive platforms. The guards surrounding the human delegation scattered in panic, and Marcus turned to his crew with fire in his eyes. "Everyone still remember your combat training?" Lieutenant Chun cracked her knuckles with a fierce grin. "Been waiting for this since we got here, Commander." Marcus grabbed a fallen guard's weapon and checked its charge. "Then let us show these aliens what humans do when someone picks a fight." He turned to Silthery, who was already issuing orders into a communication device. "The HFY fleet is stationed 3 systems away. It will take time for them to arrive. Then we hold until they get here," Marcus said simply. "Against a Korvax invasion force? You are insane." Marcus smiled that same smile he had given her at the reception, confident and unafraid. "Probably, but that has never stopped us before." He rallied his 50 crew members and charged toward the exit, heading for the battle zones where station defenders were being overwhelmed. Other aliens watched in disbelief as the tiny group of humans ran toward the fighting instead of away from it. "What are they doing?" one delegate asked in horror. Silthery watched Marcus disappear through the doors, and something warm stirred in her ancient heart. "They are being human," she replied, "and may the stars help anyone who gets in their way." She activated her communicator. "All HFY forces, full combat readiness. We stand with the humans today." Then she drew a weapon of her own and followed him into battle. The corridors of Nexus Station had become a war zone, with Korvax soldiers pouring through breached airlocks while station defenders fell back in disarray. And through it all, Marcus Cole led his tiny band of humans straight into the heart of the chaos. "Contact left," Lieutenant Chun shouted, and the humans moved as one unit, finding cover and returning fire with precision that would have impressed any military force in the galaxy. Marcus took down 3 Korvax soldiers with 3 shots, his heart pounding but his hands steady. And he felt something primal awakening in his blood, the ancient instinct that had kept humanity alive through a million years of struggle. "Push forward," he commanded. "Do not let them establish a foothold." The Korvax were bigger and stronger than humans, their scaled bodies armored and their weapons powerful, but they had never faced creatures like these before. Every human fought like 10 soldiers, moving and shooting and adapting with a fluidity that the rigid Korvax military doctrine could not match. "Why will they not die?" One Korvax officer screamed as his squad was cut down by a woman half his size. Marcus heard the scream and smiled grimly because he could have told them humans did not know how to give up, did not understand the concept of acceptable losses, and would keep fighting even when any rational species would surrender. "Commander, we have incoming from the secondary corridor," one of his crew reported. Marcus turned to see a fresh wave of Korvax soldiers charging toward them, led by a massive warrior in decorated armor, an officer of high rank. "Form up," Marcus ordered. "We hold this position." The humans braced themselves for impact, but before the Korvax could reach them, a crimson blur swept through the enemy ranks. Lady Silthery moved like liquid death, her pale hands touching every Korvax she passed, and each one crumpled to the ground as their life force was ripped away. In seconds, 24 enemy soldiers lay dead, and Silthery stood among them with her silver eyes blazing. "I thought you might need assistance," she said calmly, as if she had not just killed 20 soldiers in the time it took to breathe. Marcus laughed despite the situation. "I was wondering when you would show up. Nice entrance." "Hemavari do not do anything without style," she replied, falling into position beside him. "My fleet has entered the system and will arrive in 15 minutes. We need to survive until then. And maybe take out their command ship while we wait?" Marcus suggested. Silthery raised an elegant eyebrow. "That would require boarding the vessel and fighting through hundreds of Korvax soldiers." "So you are saying yes?" She stared at him for a moment, then shook her head with something that might have been fondness. "You are absolutely insane. Let us do it." They fought their way through the station, gathering other defenders who were inspired by the sight of humans and Hemavari fighting side by side, species that should have been enemies working in perfect harmony. Marcus led from the front, never asking his people to do anything he would not do himself, and Silthery matched him step for step, her deadly touch clearing paths through enemy ranks. They reached a docking bay where a Korvax transport ship had just landed, and Marcus saw an opportunity. "We take that ship and fly it straight into their command vessel's hangar." "That is a suicide mission," one of the station defenders protested. "Only if we fail," Marcus replied. "Who is with me?" Every human stepped forward without hesitation, and after a moment, so did Silthery and a handful of her Hemavari guards. They stormed the transport, clearing it of enemies in brutal close combat, and within minutes, they were lifting off and heading straight for the Korvax flagship. "They will shoot us down," the pilot warned. "Not if we go fast enough," Marcus said. "Maximum acceleration punch right through their shields." The transport rocketed toward the massive warship, dodging fire from defense platforms, and somehow, through luck or skill or pure human stubbornness, they made it through. The ship crashed into the hangar bay and skidded across the deck, and before it even stopped moving, Marcus was already opening the doors. "Everyone out. We find the bridge and take their commander." They fought through corridors filled with enemies, leaving destruction in their wake, and Marcus felt no fear, only the fierce joy of battle that had carried his ancestors through every conflict in human history. Finally, they burst onto the bridge, where Ambassador Vexinar stood surrounded by his personal guard, his yellow eyes wide with disbelief. "Impossible! How did you?" Marcus shot 2 guards before they could react, and his crew took care of the rest while Silthery glided toward the ambassador like an angel of death. "It is over, Vexinar," she hissed. "Your fleet is being destroyed, your plans are exposed, and your empire will answer for its crimes." Vexinar lunged for a weapon, but Silthery's hand caught his face before he could reach it. Marcus watched as the Korvax ambassador's scales turned gray and his eyes dimmed, life draining out of him in seconds. Silthery held on until there was nothing left but a husk, then let the body fall. She looked at Marcus, and for a moment he saw something in her eyes that surprised him, not satisfaction at the kill, but weariness. "You are the first I cannot drain," she said quietly. "Perhaps that makes you the first I can truly trust." Marcus understood then how lonely her existence must have been, surrounded by creatures who could not touch her without dying, feared and isolated for centuries. He reached out and took her hand, holding it firmly in his own. "On Earth, this is how we show someone they are not alone." Silthery looked down at their joined hands, and something soft in her ancient face. "Perhaps it is time I learned human customs." The battle ended quickly after that, with the Korvax flagship captured and their remaining ships fleeing into deep space. And when the Hemavari fleet arrived, they found not enemies, but allies waiting to greet them. 3 days later, the Concord Assembly gathered once more, but this time the mood was different. Instead of fear and suspicion, there was hope. The council chairman rose to address the delegates. In light of recent events and the courage displayed by the human delegation, this assembly has voted to extend full membership to humanity, not as a minor species, but as founding members of a new coalition dedicated to defending the innocent against tyranny. Cheers erupted from dozens of delegations, and Marcus felt his heart swell with pride. But the chairman was not finished. Additionally, Lady Siltheri Vexmora has proposed an unprecedented cultural and scientific exchange between Hemavari and humanity, based on the unique biological compatibility discovered between our species. This exchange has been approved unanimously. Siltheri stepped forward to stand beside Marcus, and every eye in the chamber watched them. "The Hemavari have been alone for too long," she announced. "We have relied on fear and isolation, and it has made us weak, but humans have shown us another way." She turned to face Marcus, and her voice carried clearly across the silent hall. "They have shown us that true strength comes not from being feared, but from being trusted, not from taking life, but from standing beside those who fight for others." Marcus stepped forward and extended his hand to her. "On Earth, this is how we seal a friendship and how we begin a new chapter together." Siltheri looked at his hand, remembering how it had defied her power, challenged her pride, and ultimately given her hope, and slowly she placed her pale fingers in his palm. "Then perhaps," she said with an actual smile, "it is time the galaxy learned human customs." The assembly erupted in applause as human and Hemavari stood hand in hand, two species that should have been enemies becoming something far more powerful allies, partners, friends. Later, as they walked through the station together, Siltheri spoke softly. "You know, when you touched me that second time at the reception, I wanted to kill you more than I have ever wanted to kill anything." Marcus laughed. "And now?" She squeezed his hand gently. "Now I think that touch may have saved both our peoples." Marcus nodded and looked out at the stars through a nearby viewport, thinking about Earth and all the humans who would now have a place among the stars. "Humanity has a gift for turning enemies into friends," he said, "usually by being too stubborn to stay enemies." Siltheri laughed an actual laugh, perhaps her first in centuries. "Then I look forward to seeing what else your stubborn species will accomplish." Marcus smiled and held her hand a little tighter. "Trust me, my lady, you have not seen anything yet." And somewhere in the distance, the stars seemed to shine a little brighter, welcoming humanity to its rightful place among them at last.